In a quiet suburban town, Colonel Olivia Barnes, a decorated military officer, wanted nothing more than to enjoy a simple day after returning home from a long and grueling tour of duty. But a routine trip to a small supermarket takes an unexpected turn when an encounter with an arrogant police officer escalates into something far more serious. Words are exchanged, tensions rise, and in a moment of recklessness, the officer's actions threaten to shatter the calm of Olivia's homecoming. What happens next changes everything, not just for Olivia, but for the entire community. One act of courage becomes a spark that ignites a ripple effect, inspiring people to speak up, find their voices, and demand accountability. As Olivia finds herself at the center of a growing movement, she must navigate challenges, criticism, and the weight of responsibility she never asked for. But what really happened that day? How far will the ripple effect go? And will Olivia's quiet strength be enough to bring about the change her city so desperately needs? The sun hung lazily in the sky on that warm Saturday afternoon, painting the streets of the quiet suburban neighborhood in soft shades of gold. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, making the leaves dance against the backdrop of clear blue. The world seemed at peace, as though nothing could break its rhythm. Olivia Barnes parked her dark blue SUV in the driveway of her modest, two-story house. The place was clean, comfortable, and organized, a reflection of Olivia's disciplined nature. After years of service in the military, order was something she carried with her everywhere, even into the cozy corners of her home. The house was quiet as she stepped inside, and Olivia paused in the doorway, listening to the silence. It felt both welcoming and unfamiliar. She had spent the last 18 months deployed overseas, commanding her unit in regions where life itself was unpredictable. Coming home to her own space, a home that smelled of clean linen and lemon-scented floor polish, was strange but comforting. She set her bag down and sighed deeply, feeling the weight of her exhaustion settle into her shoulders. There was something about coming home that allowed her to finally breathe. She was proud of her career. As a colonel, she had earned the respect of hundreds of soldiers and superiors alike, but the price of that respect had been high. Sleepless nights, countless sacrifices, and the constant hum of discrimination had shaped her into the resilient woman she was today. Olivia walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. The shelves were nearly empty, just a carton of milk and some condiments, reminding her that life back home required attention to the small details. She smiled faintly. As someone who had spent so much time caring for others on the field, it was a relief to care for herself now. "I need groceries," she murmured to herself, reaching for her keys once again. She didn't bother changing out of her simple white shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. There was no need for the polished uniforms and shiny medals she wore during official ceremonies. Today, she was just another woman running errands. She appreciated the anonymity, how easily she could blend into a crowd and enjoy life's simple moments without being recognized for her rank or achievements. The supermarket was a small, locally owned place, nestled in the corner of the neighborhood. It wasn't flashy or modern, but its aisles were lined with everything a person could need. Olivia pushed her cart through the automatic doors, the sound of light chatter and rolling wheels greeting her. She wandered slowly through the aisles, taking her time to pick out what she needed. There was something almost therapeutic about it, choosing items off the shelves, reading labels, and filling her cart with life's necessities. After months of rationed meals and dusty barracks, she savored every bit of this routine. At the end of the third aisle, Olivia paused to admire a row of fresh produce when a sound caught her attention. She turned her head and saw a young mother in a flustered panic. The woman, barely in her 30s, was trying to balance a squirming toddler on her hip while juggling a bag of apples that had spilled across the floor. "No, no, no, please stop moving," the woman groaned softly, clearly overwhelmed. Olivia felt a tug at her heart. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. She bent down and began gathering the apples, placing them gently back into the bag. "Here," Olivia said warmly, handing the bag back to the woman. I believe you dropped these." The young mother blinked in surprise, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, thank you so much. I am so sorry I wasn't paying attention, and my son was—" "It is no trouble," Olivia replied, smiling softly. "Little ones have a way of keeping you on your toes, don't they?" The toddler, a chubby-cheeked boy with bright blue eyes, stared at Olivia curiously, his small hands gripping his mother's shirt. Olivia made a silly face at him, and to her delight, he giggled. "You're too kind," the woman said, looking genuinely grateful. "Most people would just walk past." Olivia shrugged. "It takes very little effort to help someone, but it can make a big difference. Take care of yourself, okay?" The woman nodded, smiling shyly. "You too." Olivia watched them walk away, a faint smile lingering on her lips. Moments like that reminded her of why she believed in kindness. It didn't take much, yet so many people seemed to overlook it. As a soldier, she had seen what cruelty could do to the human spirit, how easily people could lose hope when the world turned its back on them. She refused to be that person. With her cart nearly full, Olivia turned down another aisle, taking note of the canned goods stacked neatly on the shelves. She moved slowly, appreciating how quiet it was. This was her first day back, and she intended to take her time. That was when she noticed him. A man in a navy blue police uniform stood near the end of the aisle. He was tall, with a stocky build and short-cropped blonde hair. His face was set in a permanent scowl, as though the world owed him something it refused to deliver. His name tag read, "Officer Turner," and Olivia observed him quietly, her instincts immediately sharp. The officer picked up a pack of instant noodles and a bottle of soda, holding them carelessly in one hand as he checked his phone with the other. Then, as if he had suddenly lost interest, he dropped the items. The soda bottle rolled across the aisle, bumping into a shelf. The noodles lay crumpled on the floor. Olivia watched, waiting for him to pick them up. But he didn't. He glanced down, snorted dismissively, and turned away as if it were someone else's responsibility. Her sense of discipline kicked in. Attention to detail, accountability, and responsibility. Those were the values ingrained in her. This man was supposed to be a public servant, someone who set an example for the community. Yet, here he was, treating the space as if it were beneath him. Olivia stepped forward, pushing her cart quietly. She stopped a few feet away and spoke, her voice calm but clear. "Excuse me, sir. You dropped something." The officer turned his head slowly, his expression one of irritation. His sharp blue eyes traveled from Olivia's face to her simple clothes, then back again. He tilted his head as though sizing her up. "And what about it?" he replied gruffly. "You might want to pick it up," Olivia said, maintaining her composure. "Someone could slip on that bottle, and it is only polite to clean up after yourself." The officer laughed dryly, shaking his head. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes," Olivia replied firmly. "I am serious." He stared at her for a long moment, as though deciding whether she was worth his time. Finally, he let out a short, mocking laugh. "Mind your own business, lady. You have no idea who you are talking to." Olivia felt a flicker of anger rise, but she controlled it. Years of military service had taught her to manage her emotions, no matter how provoked she was. "I know exactly who I am talking to," Olivia said. "You are an officer of the law. That uniform represents service, respect, and integrity. The least you can do is set an example." The officer's face darkened. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer, looming over Olivia with a sneer. "Listen," he said, his voice low and dripping with arrogance. "You do not tell me how to do my job. I don't take orders from someone like you." Those last words carried an undertone that Olivia recognized all too well. "Someone like you." She had heard it before, in whispered insults and sideways glances, words that reminded her she was a black woman, living in a world where people still judged her worth before knowing her story. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she stood tall, refusing to let him see her falter. "I am not giving you orders. I am reminding you of your responsibility." The officer laughed again, louder this time, as if he found the entire interaction amusing. "You've got a big mouth, lady. I suggest you keep quiet before you embarrass yourself." A few customers nearby paused to watch the interaction, their faces uneasy. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Olivia stood her ground, her expression calm but unyielding. "I suggest you think carefully about how you represent yourself," Olivia said. Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "You never know who you are talking to." The officer's sneer widened. He crossed his arms over his chest. "Oh, is that right? And who exactly are you?" Olivia held his gaze, her heart steady. She wasn't sure why she had spoken up. Perhaps it was her military instinct to correct what was wrong, or perhaps it was the memory of helping that young mother just moments earlier. Small acts of kindness mattered, but so did standing up for what was right. And in this moment, she was unwilling to back down. The air in the supermarket grew tense, almost suffocating, as Olivia stood face to face with Officer Turner. Though she remained calm on the outside, her mind was sharp, assessing the situation like she had countless times in far more dangerous environments. Years of military service had taught her to maintain her composure, even when provoked. Turner's mocking tone still hung in the air like an unpleasant odor. "And who exactly are you?" he repeated, his words laced with sarcasm. Olivia looked straight into his eyes, her voice steady. "I am someone who believes respect and responsibility are not optional, especially for those in positions of authority." Turner scoffed, shaking his head with a dry laugh. "You sound like one of those self-righteous types who think they can tell everyone else how to live. Lady, you are way out of your league." A few people nearby lingered awkwardly, pretending to browse the shelves, but clearly watching the interaction unfold. One elderly man glanced nervously at Turner before walking away quickly, as if afraid to get involved. A young woman with a phone in her hand paused, her fingers hovering as though she debated whether to start recording. Turner's expression hardened, the mocking smile replaced with something colder. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You need to move on and mind your own business. People like you." He stopped, his words dripping with implication. "People like you have no idea what it means to do my job. I do not have to answer to someone like you." "Someone like me?" Olivia repeated softly, her gaze unwavering. Her calm demeanor only seemed to provoke him further. Turner stepped closer, his large frame looming. "Yeah, someone like you." A flicker of anger stirred in Olivia's chest. She had faced insults before, both subtle and direct. As a black woman, especially one who had climbed the ranks in the military, she had grown accustomed to fighting battles others never saw. But that did not mean the words hurt any less. Still, she would not allow this man to provoke her into a reaction. Not here, not like this. "Officer Turner," Olivia said evenly, her tone carefully measured. "I suggest you stop now. Your behavior is unbecoming of the uniform you wear." Turner's sneer returned. "Is that so? You think you know what my job requires?" He crossed his arms, puffing his chest out as though trying to intimidate her. "Let me tell you something. I do not take lectures from—" Before he could finish, Olivia took a deep breath and cut him off, her voice calm but firm. "Do not mistake my kindness for weakness. I am asking you to take responsibility because your actions matter. If you cannot uphold the basic respect your role requires, maybe you should reconsider the job." The words landed like a slap. Turner's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You need to leave," he said through gritted teeth. "Now." "I am not leaving," Olivia replied, standing her ground. Turner's anger seemed to boil over. His hand instinctively dropped to his hip, where a gun sat securely in its holster. The movement was slight, but Olivia saw it. Her trained eyes noticed everything. The young woman with the phone gasped audibly, her screen now clearly aimed at Turner. Other customers froze, sensing the rising tension. "Is this really the example you want to set?" Olivia asked, her voice sharp with disappointment. Turner's face twitched with barely concealed rage, his hand lingering near his weapon, as though testing her. He took a single step closer, his presence now dangerously invasive. "I told you to back off," he hissed. For the first time, Olivia felt a flicker of alarm not for herself, but for the people nearby. Turner was unstable, clearly ruled by his pride and anger. She had seen this kind of behavior before in soldiers pushed past their limits, unable to control their emotions. But here, in a quiet supermarket, it was different. It was inexcusable. "Put your hand back where it belongs," Olivia said firmly, her voice low enough for only him to hear. "Do not make this worse." Turner blinked, startled by the quiet authority in her words. He hesitated, his hand hovering uncertainly before he finally let it drop back to his side. "I will say this one last time," Olivia continued, her tone steady as a rock. "You are in uniform. Act like it." The young woman with the phone whispered to someone nearby, her voice trembling. "I am recording this. Did you see that? He almost pulled his gun." Turner's head snapped toward her, and for a moment panic flashed across his face. He realized, too late, that his actions had been witnessed, and worse, recorded. "Turn that off!" he barked at the woman. "No," she said bravely, holding her phone closer to her chest. "You cannot treat people this way. You—" Before Turner could respond, the sudden wail of sirens outside the supermarket cut through the tension like a knife. Olivia's heart steadied. Help had arrived. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, and through them stepped Mayor Robert Griffin. His presence was both commanding and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing moments earlier. Dressed sharply in a dark suit, his gray hair neatly combed, he radiated an air of authority that demanded respect. Turner stiffened, his face paling slightly as he recognized the man who had entered. The mayor's sharp eyes swept over the scene before him, the crowd of uneasy customers, the woman clutching her phone, and finally, Officer Turner and Olivia Barnes standing face to face. His gaze softened when it landed on Olivia, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "Colonel Barnes," he said, his voice low but filled with respect. "Are you all right?" The supermarket fell silent. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Colonel—" Turner's mouth opened slightly, his confusion and disbelief clear. He turned back to Olivia, his expression frozen in shock. Olivia nodded toward the mayor, keeping her voice steady. "I am fine, sir, but I cannot say the same for what has happened here." Mayor Griffin's face hardened. He turned to Officer Turner, his calm demeanor replaced with quiet anger. "Officer Turner, what exactly is going on here?" Turner stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Sir, this woman, she was causing a disturbance. I was just trying to—" "Enough," the mayor said sharply, cutting him off. "We will get to the bottom of this. But first, I want to see that video." The young woman stepped forward, still trembling slightly. "I recorded everything," she said, holding up her phone. "He was threatening her, and he almost drew his gun." The mayor's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he took the phone and began to watch. Olivia remained still, her posture straight as ever. She had no need to explain herself. The truth was right there, clear as day. After a long moment, Mayor Griffin turned back to Turner. "You are done," he said coldly. "Hand over your weapon. You are suspended effective immediately." Turner's face crumpled, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, I said enough," the mayor repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "You have embarrassed this city, this department, and that uniform." Two other officers arrived, stepping forward to disarm Turner. He protested weakly, but they ignored him, escorting him out of the supermarket. The crowd watched in silence, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Mayor Griffin turned to Olivia. "I apologize, Colonel. This never should have happened." Olivia met his gaze, nodding respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your swift action." The mayor nodded solemnly before turning to address the crowd. "This city will not tolerate abuse of power. I promise you all, this matter will be handled appropriately." The tension in the room slowly began to fade as customers returned to their shopping. Murmuring quietly among themselves, Olivia stood tall, her heart steady once again. She had not sought this conflict, but she knew she could not have ignored it either. And as she watched Officer Turner being led away, Olivia realized something else: there were still people willing to stand up for what was right. The young woman with the phone, the mayor who had acted without hesitation. They were reminders that kindness and justice were not as rare as they sometimes seemed. Outside, the sun continued to shine. But Olivia knew that her day, and perhaps her life, had taken an unexpected turn. The supermarket seemed to exhale once Officer Turner was led outside. The tension that had gripped the room began to loosen, but for Olivia Barnes, the events lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. She stood quietly near the shelves, watching the aftermath as customers resumed their shopping, albeit hesitantly. Mayor Robert Griffin, standing tall in the middle of the aisle, returned the phone to the young woman who had recorded the incident. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You did the right thing by documenting this." The young woman nodded nervously. I could not stand there and do nothing. The woman glanced at Olivia, her expression both uncertain and admiring. "She stood up for all of us." Olivia offered her a faint, appreciative smile. "You helped more than you realize." Sophia, as Olivia would later learn her name to be, looked down at her phone, the device still trembling in her hand. "It is still recording," she said quietly. "Should I stop?" Mayor Griffin shook his head. "You keep that. I want there to be no doubt about what happened here." He glanced at Olivia. "Colonel Barnes, if you are ready, I would like to speak to you outside for a moment." "Of course, sir," Olivia replied evenly. Though inside, she was ready for a moment of fresh air. Sophia stepped aside as Olivia and the mayor walked toward the exit, the automatic doors sliding open with a quiet whoosh. Outside, the sunlight was brighter than Olivia remembered, almost blinding in contrast to the heaviness she felt inside. A crowd had gathered near the parking lot, drawn by the sound of sirens and whispers of an officer behaving improperly. Officer Turner sat in the back of a patrol car now, his face hidden from view. The other officers, silent and focused, had moved swiftly to contain the situation. For Olivia, the sight was strange. She had seen many arrests in her lifetime, but this was different. This was not war. It was a clash of pride, ego, and responsibility in a place where such things should not happen. Mayor Griffin led Olivia to the side of the building where it was quieter. For a moment, the two of them stood there in silence, the faint hum of cars on the nearby road filling the gap. "Are you all right?" the mayor asked at last. His tone was not just one of formality, it was genuine concern. "I am fine," Olivia replied with a small nod. "I have been through worse." "I do not doubt that," the mayor said, his expression softening. "But what happened in there, it was unacceptable. I am ashamed that someone wearing our city's badge behaved this way." Olivia studied him carefully, sensing the sincerity in his words. "Thank you for stepping in so quickly, sir. I do not think he expected anyone to hold him accountable." Mayor Griffin let out a short sigh. "Some men let the power of the badge go to their heads. It is not an excuse, but it is the truth." He paused, then added, "I want you to know that Officer Turner will be suspended immediately. There will be a full investigation, And if his behavior today is indicative of a pattern, he will not wear that uniform again. That is good to hear, Olivia said. The mayor tilted his head slightly, his gaze curious. I had no idea you were back in town. I heard you finished another tour overseas. I did, Olivia said simply. I got back 2 days ago. I wanted a quiet day to myself. Mayor Griffin smiled faintly. Not exactly quiet, was it? Olivia allowed herself the smallest chuckle. No, sir. The mayor's smile faded, replaced by something more thoughtful. You handled yourself with remarkable composure in there, Colonel. Most people would have lashed out in anger. Anger would not have helped, Olivia replied. It would only have given him the excuse he was looking for. The mayor nodded in understanding. It takes a certain kind of strength to stay calm under pressure. Years of training, Olivia said softly, and experience. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, I hope you know that what you did matters. Standing up for yourself and for everyone else in that room sent a message. People saw it. They will remember it. Olivia glanced out at the crowd that had gathered near the patrol car. Whispers carried through the air, snippets of conversation mixing with the sound of passing cars. Some people looked concerned, others curious. But one thing was certain. Word of what had happened was already spreading. I did not do it to be seen, Olivia said, her voice quiet but firm. I know, the mayor replied. That is what makes it even more powerful. As the mayor returned to speak with the other officers, Olivia turned and walked toward her car. Her steps were steady, her posture as straight as ever, but inside, her mind was buzzing with thoughts. She unlocked the car and sat down in the driver's seat, letting her hands rest on the steering wheel for a moment. Outside the windshield, she could still see Officer Turner sitting in the back of the patrol car, his head bowed. Olivia thought back to the words he had thrown at her, words laced with anger, arrogance, and prejudice. Words she had heard before in different forms, from different faces. They never lost their sting, no matter how much she tried to ignore them. Her phone buzzed beside her, breaking her from her thoughts. She picked it up and saw a message from her brother, David. David. Hey, sis. Just checking in. How are you holding up? Olivia smiled faintly, her heart softening at the familiar concern in her brother's words. She hesitated for a moment before replying. Olivia, I am fine. Today was eventful. I will tell you about it later. David's reply came almost immediately. David, eventful? That does not sound like a relaxing day to me. Come by the house tonight, okay? Dinner is on me. Olivia exhaled a small laugh, shaking her head. Leave it to David to make things simple. Olivia? All right. See you at 7. She put the phone down and started the car, backing out of the parking lot. As she pulled onto the road, she allowed herself to think about what had happened, about the young woman who had recorded the incident, about Mayor Griffin's quick response, and about the crowd that had silently watched everything unfold. It struck her then how much kindness and bravery it had taken for that young woman to step forward with her phone. In that moment, Sophia had made a choice. To stand on the side of what was right, even when it might have been easier to walk away. It reminded Olivia of something her father had once said when she was a child, a lesson he had repeated often. Sometimes, the smallest actions carry the greatest weight. You never know whose life you are changing when you choose to do what is right. Olivia held on to that thought as she drove through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The day had not gone how she expected, and she knew the ripple effects would continue to spread. People would talk, opinions would form, but Olivia could not control that. What she could control was how she chose to respond, and she chose to keep moving forward, as she always did. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of orange and purple, Olivia sat at her brother David's kitchen table. The house was warm and familiar, filled with the smell of dinner cooking on the stove. You look tired, David said, as he placed 2 plates on the table. Rough day? Olivia looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. It was a reminder. Of what? That no matter where you go or what you do, there will always be battles to fight, Olivia replied. But sometimes, someone unexpected will stand beside you. David sat down across from her, studying her for a moment before nodding. Sounds like someone made a difference today. Olivia smiled faintly, picking up her fork. Maybe. Or maybe they reminded me that kindness is not as rare as I thought. David grinned. Well, here is to good people, and to dinner. To good people, Olivia echoed softly, feeling the weight of the day finally begin to lift. The morning sunlight filtered through Olivia's kitchen window, casting a soft glow on the modest room. She sat quietly at her small dining table, sipping her first cup of coffee, its warmth soothing the lingering tension from the day before. The house was peaceful, the kind of stillness she had longed for while overseas. But today, the peace was accompanied by something else, an underlying unease that would not quite let go. She glanced at her phone. Overnight, the incident at the supermarket had taken on a life of its own. Her brother David had texted earlier. David, you're everywhere, sis. It's on the news now. Call me if you need anything. A quick search confirmed it. Several local news stations had picked up the story of Officer Turner's behavior at the supermarket, amplified by the video Sophia Reed had posted online. The headline was everywhere. Police officer suspended after threatening incident caught on camera. Olivia skimmed through the articles. Each told the same story. A decorated black female military officer confronted an irresponsible and abusive officer, handling the situation with calm authority. Public opinion was swift and sharp. Many condemned Turner's actions, while others praised Olivia's composure. Her name had become a rallying cry for accountability. She set the phone down, exhaling softly. Olivia had not asked for this spotlight. She had spent most of her life doing her job quietly, without seeking recognition. Her focus had always been on the people she served, not the attention it brought. And yet, here it was, swirling around her like an unstoppable storm. Later that morning, Olivia stood at her front door, locking it behind her as she prepared to head out. She had been invited to meet with Mayor Griffin and Detective Paul Harris at City Hall. The mayor's office had called earlier, insisting that her presence was important. Her drive to City Hall was short but quiet, the streets unusually calm for a weekday. Olivia's thoughts lingered on the events that had led to this moment, Officer Turner's arrogance, the video, and the mayor's swift response. More than anything, she thought about Sophia. It had taken courage for the young woman to record that video. Courage to step forward and make her voice heard. Olivia wondered how many people had witnessed similar moments of injustice, but had chosen to look away. It was easy to pretend nothing was wrong, to convince yourself it was not your fight. But Sophia had not looked away. That mattered. City Hall was a sprawling brick building, its columns tall and imposing. Olivia parked her SUV in the visitor's lot, stepped out, and approached the entrance. Inside, the cool air of the lobby hit her as she passed security and checked in. "Colonel Barnes?" the receptionist asked politely. "Yes." "Mayor Griffin and Detective Harris are expecting you in the conference room on the second floor." Olivia thanked her and made her way up the staircase. The building buzzed with quiet energy, city employees going about their day, conversations murmuring from behind closed doors. Olivia appreciated the normalcy of it. After years of war zones and barracks, even the hum of bureaucracy felt calming. When she entered the conference room, she found Mayor Griffin seated at the head of a long table, with Detective Paul Harris across from him. The detective, a tall, lean man in his 40s with neatly combed brown hair, stood as Olivia entered. "Colonel Barnes," Mayor Griffin greeted her warmly, rising to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course, sir," Olivia replied. She turned to Detective Harris, who extended his hand. "It is a privilege to meet you," he said sincerely. I have read about your career. You have my respect. Thank you, Olivia said simply, taking her seat at the table. The mayor wasted no time getting to the point. Colonel, as you know, yesterday's incident has created quite a stir. The video has gone viral, and public outrage is growing. We cannot ignore this. I would not expect you to, Olivia replied calmly. Detective Harris leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I have already begun a preliminary investigation into Officer Turner's behavior, both during and before yesterday's events. Unfortunately, this is not the first time his conduct has come into question. Olivia's expression remained neutral, though she was not surprised. What have you found? Internal complaints, Harris explained. Accusations of verbal abuse and harassment, though none were formally pursued. Most were filed anonymously, likely because the complainants feared retaliation. Mayor Griffin nodded gravely. That is a problem we cannot allow to continue. What happened to you, Colonel, was unacceptable, but it has also revealed a larger issue. This city deserves better. Agreed, Olivia said, her voice steady. The mayor studied her for a moment before speaking again. The reason we asked you here is because we believe your voice can make a difference. People are watching now. They see you as a symbol of calm leadership in the face of injustice. Olivia frowned slightly, shifting in her seat. With all due respect, sir, I did not ask for that attention. I know, the mayor said gently. But sometimes leadership finds us whether we want it or not. You handled a difficult situation with strength and dignity. That matters to people. Detective Harris nodded. Mayor Griffin is launching a formal review of the police department's culture and training programs. Accountability has to start somewhere. If you are willing, Colonel Barnes, we would like you to share your experience publicly to help push for change. Olivia took a deep breath, considering their words. She had spent years leading soldiers, navigating challenges most people could not imagine. She had fought for justice and integrity on foreign soil, but this standing in front of her own community, speaking out against something so deeply rooted, felt different. It felt personal. I am not someone who enjoys the spotlight, Olivia admitted quietly. But if my experience can help fix a broken system, then I will do it. The mayor smiled, relief evident in his expression. Thank you, Colonel. Your willingness to stand with us means more than you know. After the meeting, Olivia stepped outside City Hall and paused at the top of the steps, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The weight of what had been asked of her lingered, but so did a quiet resolve. As she made her way back to the parking lot, a familiar voice called her name. Colonel Barnes? She turned and saw Sophia Reed standing near the sidewalk, clutching her phone in one hand. She looked nervous, but determined. Sophia, Olivia said, surprised to see her. What are you doing here? I came to see you, Sophia said hesitantly. I heard you were meeting with the mayor. I wanted to thank you. Olivia tilted her head slightly. Thank me? Sophia nodded, her cheeks flushed. For standing up to him, for showing people that it is okay to speak out. She paused, then added softly, You inspired me. Olivia was quiet for a moment, studying the young woman. You inspired me too, Sophia. What you did yesterday took courage. Not everyone would have stepped up like you did. Sophia's eyes widened. I was scared. I still am. But I knew someone had to do something. That is how change happens, Olivia said gently. By people like you choosing to do what is right, even when it is hard. Sophia looked down at her phone, turning it nervously in her hands. The video I posted it is everywhere now. I did not expect it to get so much attention. I wanted people to see the truth. And they have, Olivia assured her. You made sure of that. Sophia looked up at Olivia, her expression serious. I want to do more. I want to tell stories like yours, stories that matter. Olivia smiled faintly. Then do it. The world needs more people who are brave enough to share the truth. Sophia nodded, her determination clear. I will. Thank you, Colonel. Call me Olivia, she replied, extending her hand. And thank you, Sophia. The two women shook hands, a quiet understanding passing between them. In that moment, Olivia realized something important. Sometimes the smallest acts, like holding up a phone to record an injustice, could create ripples that spread farther than anyone imagined. As Olivia walked back to her car, she felt lighter somehow. For the first time since returning home, she could see the path ahead more clearly. Change was not easy, but it was possible. And sometimes, it started with something as simple as one person refusing to look away. Olivia sat in her living room later that afternoon, her thoughts swirling like a current beneath still waters. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines of gold across the wooden floor. The house, as always, was quiet, perhaps too quiet for a day that felt so alive with movement elsewhere. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table. News articles, social media posts, and local broadcasts all told the same story. Colonel Barnes confronts police officer, sparks call for reform. Her face had been plastered across more screens in the past 24 hours than she cared to imagine. Strangers praised her calm, her composure, her heroism, though Olivia was uncomfortable with the word. Heroism, to her, was reserved for those who laid down their lives for others. What she had done yesterday had been simple, standing firm, speaking out when it mattered. It should not have been remarkable. And yet, here it was. Headlines, debates, and heated conversations rippling far beyond the supermarket aisles. Her phone buzzed again. David. Saw the news. You okay? She smiled faintly, appreciating her brother's steady concern. Olivia. I'm fine. Just processing everything. Olivia leaned back on the couch, letting her mind drift to the meeting at City Hall. The mayor's words echoed in her head. Leadership finds us whether we want it or not. It was a responsibility she had not expected but could no longer avoid. The eyes of the community were on her, now some supportive, others critical. The comments online revealed as much. While many praised her, there were always dissenting voices. She should have minded her own business. This is blown out of proportion. Why make it about race? She read the words without emotion. It was not the first time people had tried to reduce her experiences to something smaller, more palatable. She knew the truth, and she did not need their validation. By early evening, Olivia found herself craving fresh air. She stepped outside onto her front porch, the warm summer breeze brushing against her face. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant hum of lawnmowers and the laughter of children playing down the street. As she stood there, arms crossed, a car slowed near her driveway. Olivia turned her head slightly, her instincts sharpening. It was an old sedan, its windows rolled halfway down. The car lingered for a beat too long before rolling on, disappearing around the corner. She watched it leave, her jaw tightening. It was not the first time she had seen it that day. Shaking off the unease, she stepped back inside and locked the door behind her. She had been in enough dangerous situations to know when someone was watching. The fallout of yesterday's incident had begun. The next morning, Olivia woke early and laced up her sneakers for a run. She had always found peace in movement, the rhythm of her feet against the pavement, the steady rise and fall of her breath. It gave her time to think, to clear the clutter from her mind. The sun had barely risen as she ran through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. Trees cast long shadows across the sidewalks, and the air was crisp and cool. She focused on the path ahead, letting the tension in her shoulders slowly melt away. As she rounded the corner near the park, Olivia heard footsteps behind her. At first, she ignored them. It was not unusual for other joggers to share the path in the early morning hours. But as the footsteps grew closer, her instincts flared. She slowed slightly, glancing over her shoulder. A tall man in a hooded sweatshirt jogged several paces behind her, his face obscured by the hood. He kept his head low, as though avoiding eye contact. Olivia's mind sharpened, her heartbeat steady, but alert. She increased her pace, listening carefully. The man matched her stride, his footsteps echoing hers. This is not a coincidence. Reaching the edge of the park, Olivia made a sharp turn onto a residential street. She darted up a hill, forcing her legs to work harder, her breathing deep and controlled. The man behind her hesitated for a moment before following, still keeping his distance. By the time Olivia reached the top of the hill, she spotted a small convenience store at the corner. Without hesitation, she veered toward it, pushing through the door and into the brightly lit space. The clerk, a young man with dark hair and a baseball cap, looked up from his spot behind the counter. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. Olivia offered him a faint nod, glancing quickly through the front window. The man in the hooded sweatshirt lingered at the corner, looking around briefly before walking off in the opposite direction. "You okay, ma'am?" the clerk asked, his voice concerned. "Yes," Olivia said, exhaling slowly. "Just out for a run. I needed to grab some water." He gestured toward the cooler. "Take your time. I'll keep an eye out." His words were simple, but Olivia felt a flicker of unexpected gratitude. "I'll keep an eye out." It was a small kindness, a stranger offering his attention, his willingness to help. She grabbed a bottle of water, paid for it, and thanked the clerk before stepping back outside. The man in the sweatshirt was gone, the street quiet again. Still, she scanned her surroundings carefully as she started her walk home. When Olivia returned to her house, she found herself thinking about the events of the morning. The man who had followed her, the unsettling presence of the car outside her home the day before, these were signs of something larger. Officer Turner's suspension had angered the wrong people, but Olivia refused to be afraid. She sat down at her dining table and pulled out her phone, dialing David's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Liv, you okay?" "I'm fine," Olivia replied. "But I need to talk to you about something." "What happened?" David's voice shifted, instantly protective. "I think someone has been watching me. It could be nothing, but I want to make sure." David was quiet for a moment before he said, "I'm coming over." An hour later, David stood in Olivia's kitchen, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. He was tall and solidly built, his quiet demeanor masking the fierce loyalty he carried for his sister. "Are you sure it's connected to what happened at the supermarket?" David asked. "I don't believe in coincidences," Olivia replied firmly. "Not when it feels this deliberate." David nodded, his expression hardening. "We'll figure this out. You're not dealing with this alone." "I can handle myself," Olivia said softly. "I know you can," David replied. "But sometimes, Liv, it's okay to let other people stand with you." His words reminded Olivia of Sophia and the young woman's courage in recording the video. For so long, Olivia had fought her battles alone, carrying the weight of her responsibilities quietly. But perhaps David was right. Sometimes it was okay to lean on others. "Thanks, David," she said. "Any time," he replied, his voice steady. "You've been looking out for people your whole life, Liv. Now it's our turn to look out for you." That night, Olivia sat on her porch, the warm air still and quiet. The events of the last 2 days played over in her mind: the confrontation with Turner, the support from Sophia, and the mayor's promise of reform. The threats were real, but so was the kindness. The store clerk who offered his help, David's unwavering support, Sophia's courage. These moments reminded Olivia of the good that still existed, even in the face of adversity. As she stared out into the darkened street, Olivia made herself a promise. No matter what came next, no matter how difficult or dangerous, she would not let fear dictate her choices. She had spent her life standing up for what was right, and she would continue to do so. The road ahead might be uncertain, but Olivia Barnes was no stranger to difficult paths, and this time, she knew she was not walking it alone. The next morning, Olivia Barnes sat at her kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, her phone buzzing steadily beside her. Sunlight poured through the blinds, but it did little to lift the heaviness in the air. The events of the last 2 days had taken on a life of their own, and Olivia now found herself at the center of something much larger than a single confrontation. Her phone screen lit up again. Calls, messages, news alerts. People wanted statements. News anchors debated her actions. Some were supportive, applauding her courage and composure, while others twisted the story into something ugly. Why didn't she just walk away? Why escalates the situation? Was she trying to humiliate Officer Turner? The noise, both literal and figurative, had become deafening. Olivia reached for her phone and opened a new text from Mayor Griffin. Mayor Griffin. Olivia, the city council is holding a meeting today about police reforms. I think your voice could make a real impact. Can we count on you to speak? She leaned back in her chair, staring at the message. For years, Olivia had been a leader. On the battlefield, her words mattered. Her soldiers listened because they trusted her, and that trust had been earned through action, not attention. But this? Standing in front of the public? Stepping into a conversation that many people would rather ignore? That felt different. Yet, deep down, she knew the truth. She was already part of this fight, whether she wanted to be or not. The choice was clear. An hour later, Olivia arrived at City Hall. The red brick building looked both imposing and familiar, its tall columns bathed in morning light. Reporters had already gathered outside, their cameras pointed expectantly at the doors. As Olivia parked her car and stepped out, their attention immediately turned to her. "Colonel Barnes," someone called out. "Do you have a comment on Officer Turner's suspension?" "Colonel Barnes, will you be speaking today?" She ignored the barrage of questions, keeping her head high as she climbed the steps. Years of military training had taught her how to handle pressure. This was no different. Yet as she stepped inside, the weight of the situation settled squarely on her shoulders. A city council meeting room had been set up in the large hall. Rows of folding chairs were already filled with community members, business owners, off-duty police officers, and local activists. A low murmur of voices hummed in the background, the air thick with anticipation. Mayor Robert Griffin stood near the podium at the front of the room. He caught sight of Olivia as she entered and made his way over, extending his hand. "Colonel," he said warmly, shaking her hand, "I am glad you came." "I did not come for the politics," Olivia replied evenly. "I came because this matter." The mayor's expression softened. "And that is exactly why your voice will make a difference." As the meeting began, Olivia took a seat near the front. The city council members, 5 men and women seated behind a long table, called the session to order. The council chair, a middle-aged man with a stern face, addressed the room. "We are here today to discuss the recent incident involving Officer Brad Turner, as well as the broader concerns regarding accountability and conduct within our police force." The crowd stirred at his words, some murmuring in agreement, others crossing their arms defensively. Olivia's gaze swept the room, taking in the mixture of emotions: anger, frustration, hope, and distrust. These people were all here for the same reason, yet their experiences were worlds apart. The first speaker was Detective Paul Harris, the officer who had spoken to Olivia after the incident. He approached the podium, his presence calm and steady. "Good morning," Harris began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "I have served in law enforcement for nearly 20 years. I have worked alongside officers who risk their lives every day to serve this city honorably. But let us be honest, there are cracks in the system. And when someone like Officer Turner abuses his power, it does not just harm the person he targeted, it harms all of us." A few people in the crowd nodded. Others sat silently, watching. "We cannot ignore what happened," Harris continued. "We need better accountability, better training, and above all, a culture that values respect over pride." His words were strong, but measured. When he stepped away, the room erupted into quiet murmurs. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The next speakers were community members, a local pastor who spoke of trust eroded, a small business owner who shared concerns about safety, and a young woman who recounted her own experience of being mistreated by an officer. Each voice added weight to the conversation. Finally, the council chair looked toward the front row. "Colonel Barnes," he said, "we understand you were involved in the incident that prompted today's meeting. If you are willing, we would like to hear from you." The room fell into a tense silence. Olivia stood slowly, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her. She made her way to the podium, her boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. Taking a steadying breath, she looked out at the crowd, at the mixture of faces, young and old, skeptical and hopeful. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and calm. "My name is Olivia Barnes. I served as a colonel in the United States Army for over 20 years. I have led soldiers into dangerous situations, and I have seen firsthand what happens when leadership fails." The room was silent now, the tension palpable. "What happened in that supermarket was not about me," Olivia continued. "It was about a system that allows people like Officer Turner to feel untouchable. I did not stand up to him because I wanted attention. I stood up to him because it was the right thing to do." She paused, letting the words settle. "Leadership," she said softly, "is not about power. It is about responsibility. The badge Officer Turner wore is supposed to represent trust. It is supposed to mean protection, service, and respect. But that trust has been broken not just by one man, but by a culture that looks the other way." A ripple of agreement swept through the crowd. "There are good officers in this city," Olivia added, "officers who honor their roles and serve their communities with integrity. But they cannot succeed if we allow bad actors to tarnish their work." She looked directly at the council members, her gaze steady. "It is time for change. Not empty promises, but real reform, real accountability. And if we are going to fix this, it starts with honesty about what is broken." A moment of silence followed her words. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, applause began. It grew steadily, filling the space with the sound of hands coming together, not in celebration, but in agreement. Olivia stepped back from the podium, her expression calm, though her heart beat a little faster in her chest. She had not prepared a speech. She had spoken from her heart, and she could only hope that her words had landed where they needed to. As the meeting concluded, Olivia made her way toward the exit. A few people stopped her along the way, a young black mother who thanked her for speaking up, an elderly man who shook her hand and said quietly, "It needed to be said." Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the heavy conversations inside. Olivia took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. "Colonel Barnes!" She turned to see Sophia Reed jogging up the steps, her phone tucked under her arm. Her face was flushed, but she was smiling. "You were incredible in there," Sophia said, slightly out of breath. Olivia smiled faintly. "I just said what needed to be said." "You did more than that," Sophia replied. "People are listening because of you. They are talking about change because of you." Olivia considered her words carefully. "I am just one voice, Sophia. Change takes more than that." "Maybe," Sophia said, "but someone has to start it." Olivia looked at the young woman, seeing both her determination and hope. For the first time in days, Olivia allowed herself to feel something close to optimism. "Then let us hope this is the start," she said quietly. As she walked back to her car, Olivia realized that the road ahead would not be easy. The fight for change never was. But if standing up had set something in motion, then it was worth it. And in the moments of uncertainty, she reminded herself of the kindness she had witnessed the young woman who recorded a video, the store clerk who offered his help, and the community members who spoke their truth. Change, Olivia thought, began with people who refused to look away, and that gave her hope. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as Olivia pulled into her driveway, her mind still lingering on the city council meeting. The weight of the day followed her inside, but it was not a burden she resented. As she stepped into her quiet home, a feeling of cautious hope crept into her thoughts. The meeting had been a step, just one, but a step forward nonetheless. The community had spoken, their voices raw and honest. People were tired of being ignored. Olivia had heard their stories, stories of mistrust, fear, and the desperate need for accountability. It was more than Officer Turner. It was about a system that had turned its back on the people it was meant to serve. She dropped her bag on the entryway table and made her way to the kitchen. The house, as always, was still and peaceful. Yet the silence felt heavier tonight. As she poured herself a glass of water, the echoes of her own words at the podium replayed in her mind. It is time for change, not empty promises, but real reform. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Change had been the theme of her life. In the military, she had led soldiers through battles both seen and unseen. Some were physical, but others were moral fights for dignity, integrity, and survival. She was no stranger to difficult paths, yet this fight felt personal in a way she had not expected. The shrill ring of her doorbell jolted her from her thoughts. Olivia frowned slightly, glancing at the clock. It was late for visitors. She approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. To her surprise, standing on the porch was Sophia Reed, the young woman who had recorded the incident at the supermarket. Olivia opened the door, her expression softening. "Sophia," she said, "it's late. Is everything all right?" Sophia smiled nervously, tucking a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. She carried a large envelope under her arm. "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced," she said quickly. I wanted to show you something." Olivia stepped back, gesturing for her to come inside. "Come in. You don't have to stand out there." Sophia entered the house hesitantly, glancing around as though worried she was intruding. The living room was neat and warm, filled with small touches of Olivia's personality, family photos on the shelves, a well-worn couch, and a folded American flag in a display case on the mantel. "You have a beautiful home," Sophia said softly. "Thank you," Olivia replied, closing the door behind her. "What brings you here?" Sophia took a deep breath and held up the large envelope. "I wanted to share this with you. It's important to me, and I think it might mean something to you too." She handed the envelope to Olivia, who accepted it with a slight frown of curiosity. "What is it?" "Open it," Sophia said, her voice quiet but eager. Olivia slid her thumb under the flap and pulled out a neatly bound stack of papers. At first glance, it looked like a draft of an article. The title, printed in bold letters at the top, caught her attention. "The Ripple Effect: How Small Acts of Courage Spark Change." Olivia glanced up at Sophia, who shifted nervously on her feet. "I wrote it," Sophia explained. "It's a story about you, about what happened at the supermarket, and what it means not just for you, but for everyone who was watching. I've been working on it for days." Olivia's expression softened. "You wrote this?" Sophia nodded quickly. "I'm studying journalism at the community college. It's something I've always been passionate about, telling stories that matter. When I saw what happened, I knew I couldn't just stand by. But recording the video wasn't enough for me. I wanted to dig deeper, to talk about what it means to stand up for what's right." Olivia looked back at the article, skimming through the first few paragraphs. Sophia's writing was raw but powerful. She had captured the details of the incident, Turner's arrogance, Olivia's composure, and the impact it had on the people who had witnessed it. Colonel Barnes stood her ground, not with anger, but with quiet strength, proving that courage is not about who shouts the loudest, but who refuses to back down in the face of injustice. Olivia paused, her heart stirring as she read the words. She looked back up at Sophia, who was watching her anxiously. "This is impressive," Olivia said. "You've written something meaningful here." Sophia let out a small breath of relief, her smile tentative. "I hope so. I wanted to show people that moments like that matter, that one person standing up can create ripples that go further than we can see." Olivia stared at her for a long moment, feeling a sense of quiet pride. "You're right," she said softly. "It does matter. And you've done something important by telling this story." Sophia's eyes brightened. "Do you think so? I wasn't sure if anyone would care." "Trust me," Olivia replied, her tone firm. "People care more than you think. You just have to give them the chance to listen." They sat together at the kitchen table as Olivia read through the article in detail, offering small suggestions here and there. Sophia listened intently, scribbling notes in a small notebook she had pulled from her bag. "You have a talent for this," Olivia said as she finished. "You write with purpose." Sophia beamed. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." "What made you want to pursue journalism?" Olivia asked, genuinely curious. Sophia hesitated, twirling her pen between her fingers. "I guess I've always believed that stories can change people. My dad used to say that the truth is the most powerful thing in the world, if you have the courage to tell it. He passed away when I was young, but those words stuck with me." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "He was right." Sophia smiled faintly. "I want to be brave like you. I want to tell stories that matter, even when it's hard." Olivia leaned back in her chair, studying the young woman before her. Sophia was young, but her resolve was clear. It reminded Olivia of the soldiers she had led, the ones who showed up every day, no matter how afraid they were, because they believed in what they were fighting for. "Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid," Olivia said quietly. "It means you act anyway, because you know it's the right thing to do." Sophia nodded, absorbing her words. "That's what you did, isn't it? At the supermarket." Olivia smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe I just refused to let someone like Officer Turner believe he could get away with it." Sophia closed her notebook and tucked it into her bag. "I'm submitting the article to our local paper tomorrow. I hope it helps people see what's really happening, not just the bad, but the good too." "It will," Olivia assured her. "Your voice matters, Sophia." Sophia stood and slung her bag over her shoulder, her confidence seeming to grow with every passing moment. "Thank you, Olivia, for everything." "Keep doing what you're doing," Olivia replied, walking her to the door. "The world needs people like you." As Sophia stepped outside and waved goodbye, Olivia stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her walk down the street. The young woman's determination gave her a sense of hope, proof that even the smallest actions could lead to something bigger. That evening, as the house settled into its familiar stillness, Olivia sat on her porch with a cup of tea. She thought about Sophia's words, about the courage it took to tell the truth when others might shy away. Her father's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Sometimes, it only takes one person to spark a change." The world was not perfect. There were battles yet to fight, injustices yet to face. But as Olivia looked out into the quiet night, she realized that change was already happening. It was in the mayor who had acted swiftly, in Detective Harris who believed in accountability, and in Sophia, a young woman with a notebook and a voice strong enough to carry the truth. One act of courage had created ripples, and Olivia knew those ripples would spread further than she could see. The morning air was cool and crisp as Olivia Barnes stepped onto her front porch, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She let her eyes drift over the quiet street. The neighborhood was waking up. Dogs barked faintly in the distance. Children in backpacks shuffled toward a nearby bus stop, and the low hum of traffic carried from a main road not far away. To any observer, it was a normal day. Yet beneath that surface, something had shifted. and Olivia could feel it in her bones. The fallout from the supermarket incident had begun to ripple wider. Yesterday's city council meeting had been a first step, but the energy in the room had been undeniable. Conversations that had once been whispered were now spoken aloud. Olivia knew change did not happen overnight, but something real had started. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down and saw a new message from Sophia Reed. Sophia. Good news. The paper is running my article this morning. They put it online already. It's getting a lot of shares. You made an impact, Olivia. Olivia smiled faintly, her chest swelling with quiet pride. Sophia's persistence reminded her of her younger self, determined, brave, and unwilling to look away from what mattered. She picked up her phone and clicked the link Sophia had sent. The article opened quickly, the bold headline catching her eye. The Ripple Effect: How Courage Can Spark Change. Olivia read through the piece again, though she already knew its content. Sophia had captured not only the facts of the supermarket incident, but the broader truth that accountability and justice were things worth fighting for, even in the face of fear. The article had struck a nerve. Comments flooded the page, some supportive, others dismissive, but Sophia's message had been heard. Olivia hoped it would be enough to push the city toward real action. Later that morning, Olivia made her way to the small local diner on the corner of Main Street. It was a cozy place, linoleum floors, vinyl booths, and a counter lined with stools where regulars sat sipping coffee. The faint smell of bacon and pancakes hung in the air, mingling with the sound of clinking plates. She had promised her brother David she would meet him for breakfast, though Olivia suspected he wanted to check on her more than anything else. She appreciated his concern, even if he had a habit of being quietly overprotective. When she walked in, David was already seated in a booth near the window. He waved her over, a grin spreading across his face. There she is, the woman of the hour. Do not start, Olivia replied, shaking her head as she slid into the booth across from him. David laughed softly. I'm just proud of you, Liv. That article Sophia wrote. It's everywhere. People are finally paying attention. I didn't ask for any of this, Olivia said, picking up the menu. I just wanted to do the right thing. David's expression turned more serious. Sometimes doing the right thing makes you a target. You knew that going in. She sighed, setting the menu down. I did. I just didn't expect it to snowball this fast. You've always been a leader, David said, his voice calm. This time is no different. You just happen to be leading in a new way. Before Olivia could respond, a voice interrupted their conversation. Excuse me. Olivia turned to see a woman standing beside their booth. She looked to be in her 50s, her face lined with worry and years of hard work. She clutched a small leather purse in her hands, her knuckles pale. I'm sorry to interrupt, the woman said nervously. You're Olivia Barnes, aren't you? The woman from the supermarket video? Olivia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Can I help you? The woman shifted on her feet, as if unsure of herself. I just wanted to say thank you, she said softly, for standing up to that officer. People like me, we don't always feel like we can speak out. But when I saw you, I thought, maybe we can. Her words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Olivia felt her chest tighten, an unexpected wave of emotion rising within her. What's your name? Olivia asked gently. Janet, the woman replied. Janet Lawson. Well, Janet, Olivia said, meeting her gaze, I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was right. And so, can you? Janet's lips trembled faintly, her eyes softening with gratitude. It gives me hope seeing someone like you. Maybe things really can change. David, silent until now, smiled warmly. They can, he said. It starts with people like my sister and people like you. Janet nodded, her shoulders seeming to lift as if a weight had been taken off them. Thank you again, she said softly, before walking away. As Olivia watched her go, David leaned back in his seat. "See, that's why you're doing this." "Doing what?" Olivia asked. "Being the example people need," he replied. "That woman probably hasn't spoken up about anything in years, but you gave her the courage to hope." Olivia looked down at her hands, Janet's words still echoing in her mind. Maybe things really can change. After breakfast, Olivia decided to stop by the small community center downtown. It was a place she had visited often when she was younger, somewhere that felt like the heart of the city. Children played basketball in the gymnasium, while seniors gathered for morning chess games and conversation. She parked her SUV in the gravel lot and made her way inside. The building buzzed with life, a hum of laughter and movement filling the space. It was a reminder of what community was supposed to feel like: connected, alive, and full of possibility. As Olivia walked through the halls, she spotted Sophia sitting at a table in the small library area, her laptop open in front of her. She was surrounded by stacks of books and papers, her face scrunched in concentration. "You're hard at work," Olivia said, approaching the table. Sophia looked up quickly, startled, but broke into a smile when she saw Olivia. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" "Just stopping by," Olivia replied, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. "What are you working on now?" Sophia gestured to the books and papers scattered around her. "Research. I want to write a follow-up article not just about the supermarket incident, but about what's happening in the city now. People are talking about reform, but I want to dig into what that really looks like. What changes are needed, and what people like Mayor Griffin and Detective Harris are actually doing." Olivia smiled faintly, her admiration for Sophia growing. "You're persistent, aren't you?" Sophia grinned. "Someone has to be." "You're right," Olivia said softly. "Change doesn't happen without persistence." Sophia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I wanted to tell you after the article went live, my journalism professor called me. He said he's never seen something I've written get so much attention. He thinks I have potential, Olivia. Real potential." "You do," Olivia replied without hesitation, "and I'm glad you're starting to see it too." Sophia's smile widened, and for a moment, Olivia saw the impact of small encouragement. The ripple effect was real, not just for the city, but for the individuals caught up in it. Sophia had chosen to act, and now her voice was being heard. "Keep digging for the truth, Sophia," Olivia said as she stood. "The world needs people who are brave enough to tell it." Sophia nodded. "I will. Thank you, Olivia." As Olivia left the community center, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change was never easy. It was slow, messy, and often met with resistance. But as Sophia had reminded her, persistence mattered. People like Janet Lawson, who had once been silent, were beginning to speak. Young voices like Sophia's were rising up to ask questions and demand answers. And though Olivia had never sought this role, she understood now that her actions were part of something bigger. It had started with one moment, one choice to stand firm in the face of injustice. But the ripples were spreading, and Olivia knew she could not stop now. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it did not feel so lonely. The hum of conversation filled the modest conference room at the local community center, where folding chairs had been arranged in rows facing a small wooden podium. The evening sun streamed through tall windows, casting streaks of light across the gathered crowd. Olivia Barnes sat near the back of the room, quietly observing. It was an open forum organized by the City Council, a follow-up to the council meeting Olivia had spoken at just days earlier. This time, the focus was on gathering input from the community voices that had gone unheard for too long. Olivia had not come here to speak. She had come to listen. The turnout was larger than she had expected. People filled the chairs and lined the back of the room, leaning against walls. Some were familiar faces like Mayor Griffin, who stood near the front talking to residents, and Detective Harris, who watched quietly from the side. But there were also ordinary citizens, young and old, Professionals, workers, parents, and students drawn together by a shared desire for change. Sophia Reed was there too, perched near the front with her notebook and pen, ready to capture every word. When their eyes met, Olivia offered her a small nod. At the podium, a middle-aged man adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to hear from you your concerns, your frustrations, and your ideas. What can we do to rebuild trust in this city?" There was a pause before the first speaker approached the podium, a young black man in his 20s. His voice was steady, though Olivia could hear the emotion behind his words. "I work as a delivery driver," he said, gripping the edge of the podium. "And every time I see flashing lights behind me, I feel my stomach drop. I've done nothing wrong, but I still wonder, is this the day something goes wrong? No one should have to feel like that just for existing." His words resonated, a quiet ripple of agreement passing through the crowd. A woman followed, her voice trembling, as she described an incident where her teenage son had been stopped by police for no reason other than walking home at dusk. Then came an elderly man who shared a memory from decades ago, a time when trust in the badge meant something different. One by one, voices rose to share stories of fear, frustration, and mistrust. Olivia listened, her heart heavy with their words. Each story was a reminder of why this fight mattered. It was not just about Officer Turner or a single moment, it was about a system that had failed to live up to its promises. As the evening wore on, the room seemed to shift. It was subtle, but Olivia could feel it, something like hope threading its way through the crowd. People were speaking their truths, but they were also beginning to ask questions. How do we fix this? What can we do? Near the end of the evening, a familiar voice broke through Olivia's thoughts. "Excuse me." She turned her head to see Janet Lawson, the woman from the diner, standing hesitantly at the edge of the room. Janet clutched a small notepad in her hand, her shoulders tense, but she walked toward the podium with quiet determination. The room hushed as Janet adjusted the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Janet Lawson. I've lived in this city my whole life. I raised 2 daughters here, and now I'm helping raise my grandchildren." She paused, her gaze scanning the crowd. "For years, I've been afraid to speak up. I've watched things happen that were not right, people treated unfairly, voices ignored, but I didn't say anything because I thought no one would listen." A few people nodded silently. "But then I saw what happened at the supermarket," Janet continued, her voice growing stronger. "I saw a woman, a stranger, stands up and refused to back down, and it made me think, maybe I could do the same. Maybe all of us can." Sophia scribbled furiously in her notebook, her head bent. Olivia watched Janet closely, moved by the courage it had taken for her to speak. "I don't have the answers," Janet admitted, her tone softening again. "But I know we can't just pretend everything is fine. We have to hold people accountable, not just the ones who make mistakes, but those of us who see it happening, and stay quiet." She looked toward the back of the room, her eyes meeting Olivia's briefly before she stepped away from the podium. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, some hesitant, others enthusiastic. Janet returned to her seat, her face flushed but relieved. After the forum ended, people lingered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Sophia made her way to Olivia, clutching her notebook and beaming. "Did you hear her?" Sophia said, excitedly. "Janet was incredible." "I heard her," Olivia replied with a faint smile. "That took courage." Sophia nodded, her eyes shining. "I think people are finally starting to believe that they can make a difference." Before Olivia could respond, Mayor Griffin approached, his expression thoughtful. "Colonel Barnes," he said, extending his hand, "I'm glad you came tonight." "I came to listen," Olivia said, shaking his hand. "Sometimes that's what people need the most." The mayor nodded. "You're right. And what we heard tonight, those stories, this is where change begins. Sophia chimed in, her excitement evident. It's like you said, Mayor. One act of courage can inspire others. Janet wouldn't have spoken if she hadn't seen Olivia stand up to Officer Turner. Mayor Griffin smiled faintly. The ripple effects. He turned back to Olivia, his expression serious. We're forming a community task force to oversee reforms within the police department, training, accountability, everything. I'd like you to be a part of it. Olivia's brow furrowed slightly. Me? Yes, the mayor said. People trust you, Olivia. You've shown what leadership looks like. We need that now more than ever. Olivia hesitated. She had spent her entire career in leadership. But this was different. This was not a battlefield. It was her own community, and the stakes were personal. You don't have to decide right now, Mayor Griffin said, sensing her hesitation. Think about it. He gave her a respectful nod before stepping away, leaving Olivia and Sophia standing together. Sophia looked up at her, wide-eyed. You should do it, Olivia. It's not that simple, Olivia replied quietly. Real change takes more than one person. I know, Sophia said, her voice steady. But you've already started something. You've shown people that their voices matter. Now they need you to keep leading. Olivia looked down at the young woman, seeing the earnestness in her eyes. Sophia believed in this fight, believed in her. And Olivia realized that saying no was not an option. That night, as Olivia sat on her porch with a cup of tea, she reflected on the forum. Janet's voice still echoed in her mind, soft but resolute, carrying years of unspoken truth. Maybe all of us can. Change did not belong to one person. It belonged to everyone. Olivia had lit a spark, but the flames were catching now. Janet, Sophia, Mayor Griffin, and the dozens of people who had stood up and shared their stories. For so long, Olivia had carried the weight of leadership alone. But this fight was different. She was not alone this time. She thought about the mayor's offer and about Sophia's words. The truth was, Olivia had already made her decision. She would keep showing up, keep standing firm, because the people around her deserved nothing less. The world did not change overnight, but it did change one voice at a time, one small act at a time. As Olivia sat there beneath the starry sky, she let herself feel something she had not allowed in a long time: hope. The days that followed the community forum felt different, not just for Olivia Barnes, but for the city itself. Conversations that had once been hushed now took place openly. Small groups gathered in cafes, schools, and parks, sharing their thoughts about what accountability and justice should look like. For the first time in a long time, it felt like people believed change was possible. For Olivia, those days were filled with a quiet resolve. After much thought, she had accepted Mayor Griffin's invitation to join the community task force. It was not a decision she had taken lightly. Stepping into this role would mean navigating criticism, skepticism, and resistance from people who did not want change. But she was ready for it. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of her modest kitchen as Olivia sat at the table, flipping through a binder full of notes from the first task force meeting. She had spent hours the previous evening working through it, highlighting areas of focus, police training reforms, accountability measures, and community outreach programs. It was a daunting task, but Olivia approached it the way she had approached every challenge in her life, with determination. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. It was a text from Sophia Reed. Sophia, good morning. Janet Lawson agreed to do an interview with me for the follow-up article. I thought you should know you inspired her. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Olivia's lips. Janet, the quiet woman who had once been afraid to speak up, was now using her voice. It was a reminder that courage had a way of spreading quietly, steadily, like a ripple across a pond. That afternoon, Olivia drove across town to the mayor's office for the second task force meeting. The task force was made up of a diverse group of people: community leaders, educators, law enforcement officers, and activists. Olivia had insisted from the beginning that the table reflect the voices that needed to be heard most. When she entered the conference room, Mayor Griffin was already there, deep in conversation with Detective Paul Harris and a few community leaders. The energy in the room was focused but tense. There was still a long road ahead, and everyone knew it. "Olivia," Mayor Griffin said warmly, gesturing for her to join them. "Good to see you." She nodded, taking a seat at the table. Detective Harris offered her a respectful smile. "Colonel," he said, "glad to have you here." The meeting began with a report from Harris, who outlined the progress on the investigation into Officer Brad Turner. His tone was professional, but there was no mistaking the weight of his words. "Officer Turner's dismissal is now official," Harris said. "In addition, internal reviews have uncovered several other complaints that were overlooked. Those cases are now being investigated." Murmurs of approval swept the room. Olivia remained quiet, listening carefully. "The department is not beyond saving," Harris continued, his gaze steady. "But it is going to take time. We need to rebuild trust, not just through words, but through action." Olivia finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Accountability is only the first step," she said. "We need preventative measures too. Training programs that focus on de-escalation, respect, and cultural awareness. Officers should be equipped to serve their communities, not dominate them." Several heads nodded in agreement. A young woman across the table, an educator from the local high school, added, "And we need to start young. We need to build relationships between officers and our students so that trust can grow early." The discussion continued, each voice adding new layers to the conversation. Olivia felt something shift in the room, not a solution, but a shared commitment to the work ahead. Change, as she had come to realize, was not a single moment. It was a process, built one decision at a time. After the meeting, Olivia stepped outside and found herself drawn to the small park across the street. It was a quiet space, filled with benches and blooming trees, the sound of children playing in the distance. She sat down on a bench near a small fountain, letting the cool air calm her thoughts. A familiar voice broke through her solitude. "Colonel Barnes?" Olivia turned to see Janet Lawson approaching, holding a small paper bag in one hand. She looked more relaxed than the last time Olivia had seen her, her shoulders straighter, her gaze clearer. "Janet," Olivia said, smiling faintly. "It's good to see you." Janet sat down beside her, setting the paper bag in her lap. "I saw you coming out of the mayor's office," she said. "I thought I'd say hello." "I'm glad you did," Olivia replied. "How are you?" Janet hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Better. I feel like I can breathe again. After the forum, I realized how much I've been holding in for years. Speaking up wasn't easy, but it felt right." "It takes courage to do what you did," Olivia said gently. Janet nodded, looking thoughtful. "You know, I spent so much time thinking my voice didn't matter. But seeing you stand up that day, it reminded me that silence doesn't protect us. It just makes us invisible." Olivia looked at her, seeing the strength in her words. "You're not invisible, Janet. Not anymore." Janet smiled softly, then opened the paper bag and pulled out 2 small muffins. "I brought these from the bakery. Thought you might want one." Olivia chuckled, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." As they sat together, sharing muffins on the bench, Olivia felt a sense of peace she had not felt in days. This was what change looked like, not sweeping gestures or grand speeches, but moments like this. 2 people from different walks of life, sitting together and finding common ground. That evening, Olivia returned home to find another message from Sophia, waiting on her phone. "Sophia, Janet's interview turned out amazing. She said something I think you'll appreciate. Sometimes all it takes is one person to remind you that you have a voice worth using." Olivia stared at the words for a moment, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Sophia's follow-up article had been published that afternoon, and its title was simple but powerful: Finding Our Voices, How a Community Learned to Stand Together. The next morning, Olivia stepped out onto her porch with her coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. A young father jogged by, pushing a stroller. An elderly woman across the street watered her garden, waving when she saw Olivia. There was something different in the air, a quiet sense of connection, as though the city itself was beginning to breathe again. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was David. "David, proud of you, sis. You're making a difference." Olivia took a deep breath, letting the words settle. She did not think of herself as a hero. She was just someone who had chosen to do what was right, even when it was hard. But now, she could see how her actions had spread, how one moment of standing firm had inspired others to find their voices too. As she sipped her coffee, Olivia thought about the road ahead. There was still work to be done: meetings, reforms, conversations that would not be easy. But she was not alone. Sophia, Janet, David, Mayor Griffin, and countless others were part of this fight now. Change is not a moment, it is a movement, she thought. And Olivia Barnes was ready to keep moving forward. The world, she realized, was not perfect. It was messy, difficult, and full of struggles. But it was also full of people who cared enough to make a difference. People who refused to look away. People who, in their own small ways, sparked hope. And sometimes, hope was all you needed to start something bigger. A few weeks later, the city felt different. Change was slow, but Olivia Barnes could see its early signs taking root. Officer Brad Turner's dismissal had sent a clear message. Accountability mattered. Mayor Griffin's task force had begun to roll out new policies, retraining programs for officers, community outreach initiatives, and systems for addressing misconduct transparently. Sophia Reed's articles continued to gain traction, her words becoming a rallying point for truth and justice. Janet Lawson's story, shared through Sophia's follow-up piece, resonated with countless others who had once felt invisible. More people were speaking up, sharing their experiences, and demanding to be heard. Olivia stood on her front porch that evening, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, its golden glow fading into deep shades of blue and purple. The world was far from perfect, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hope for what could be. She thought back to the small moments that had led her here, the decision to speak up at the supermarket, the courage of strangers like Sophia and Janet, and the quiet kindness of her brother, David, who had always believed in her. Change begins with small acts, she reminded herself. And sometimes it takes only one person to remind others that they have the power to make a difference. As she stepped back inside, Olivia sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop. She drafted a short note to the mayor, offering her thoughts on the task force's next steps. After hitting send, she paused, staring at the screen for a moment. She knew her work was far from over, but she also knew she was not doing it alone. The city was waking up to something better, something stronger. Thank you for following this story of courage, resilience, and hope. Olivia Barnes reminds us all that even in the face of adversity, standing up for what is right can spark change far beyond what we can see. Sometimes, it takes one person's bravery to inspire a community. Sometimes, the smallest acts, whether it is speaking up, holding others accountable, or showing kindness, can create ripples that touch countless lives. If this story has inspired you, please consider joining us on this journey. Together, we can continue sharing meaningful stories that uplift, educate, and connect us all. Do not forget to hit the like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story of hope, kindness, and change. Thank you for being here, and see you in the next story.